The pitter-patter of rain can certainly be comforting on a dark night whilst trying to fall asleep. But it can also be used as a smokescreen for those out to get you. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. This happened to me back when I was 10 years old, and I was walking to my friend's house. It was on a Saturday around noontime, and my friend lived about a 5-minute, if not less, walk away from my house. About halfway through the walk, a rainstorm came out of nowhere, and being 10 years old, just wanting to get to my friend's house, I decided against running back for a jacket. When I reached the street off my friend's street, an inconspicuous white van pulled up beside me. The sliding door swung open, and a lady in her early 30s asked me if I wanted a ride, as it was raining outside and I had no jacket. Being a very safe kid, I told her that I was going to a friend's house just up the street, and that I would be fine. She responded by insinuating that I had to get in with them, and that they would drive me. A little backstory on the van. In my southern Ontario city at the time, there was a constant news report of, and I kid you not, a white van abducting numerous children. And I believe that one of the children believed to be abducted by this van was actually killed. They were described as a white Dodge Caravan, and I always remembered this because it was the same type of van that my mother drove, but she drove a blue one. Anyway, back to the story. So, as I told the van that I was fine, the remembrance of the story of the white van sparked into my mind. The van was known by the locals as Old Grump, as an elderly man with a forwards ball cap was always seen driving it, and I was absolutely mortified when I looked towards the driver's seat to see an old man with a ball cap at the wheel. I'm even getting chills just thinking about this, let alone being alone on a street with these creeps in front of me. When I noticed the old man, I remembered more details of the van, the obstructed or non-existent plates, and considering I was about 2 feet away from the back of the van, I glanced to look at the license plates, which are obscured by a garbage bag. The total time elapsed between the van pulling up and me saying no, the lady trying to get me inside, and the realization of the situation was probably around 45 seconds. When I realized what could possibly happen, I told her that I really had to go, and I darted out of there. I have never moved so fast in my entire life as I began to run. I heard the lady curse, and the door come whirring shut. The van began to accelerate again, but luckily for me, after cutting across a few lawns, I was maybe 20 meters from my friend's house. As I reached my friend's house, I recall jumping over the water runoff between his and his neighbor's house, and coming to their porch staircase. Now, most houses in my area have maybe 2 to 4 steps, and then their front door, but my friend living in a condo had about 15 steps, and their door being about 2 meters off the ground. I sped up the steps as fast as I could, pounded on his door, and looked through the glass and saw him walking slowly towards the door. At this point I was screaming for Cody to open the door, and then turned around to see the van just arriving across the street, perhaps 2 or 3 doors down in this suburban neighborhood, and about 50 feet away. My friend perked up and bolted towards the door, quickly unlocking it, and I rushed inside. To save some time, I summarized the story to him. We were both 10 years old, and just intended on an afternoon of playing some Tom and Jerry style Street Fighter on PS2, when this whole ordeal happened. We panicked and we didn't know what to do. His parents were not home and neither were mine, and we wouldn't dare go outside to fetch help from the neighbours. We were on the border of calling the police, and this is when it gets really messed up. We picked up the phone, but the line was dead. There would be no calling the police. It sounds extremely bullshit, but the area was only a few months old, so the phone and internet was extremely unpredictable. And now, with that harsh weather, it was no surprise that the line went dead. We lay down on his living room floor as it hid us out of sight and allowed us to look out the front window. We had began peering outside with a pair of mini binoculars that he had in his room. My friend handed them to me, and I brought them to my eyes. I look outside, and to my surprise no one was in the van anymore. It was completely empty. I handed them to my friend, and he stopped his breathing. I remember whispering to him, "What is it, dude?" And then before he answered, banging began on his garage door. We almost pissed ourselves, and were on the verge of crying. My buddy Cody was frozen solid, and we didn't know what to do. Considering it was a condo, the living room being 15 feet away from the door, and we could hear everything. We heard the handle on the garage being fumbled with, so we grabbed kitchen knives and proceeded down the stairs silently. And when we got to the bottom of the first flight of stairs, Cody remembered in a moment of panic that his dad's uncle lived in the bottom flat of the condo and would possibly be home. We pushed open the door and began calling out his name, Brian, but he wasn't there. We were petrified, but felt a sense of security because we had 2 big kitchen knives. With our knives, we proceeded into the garage. Scared, my heart was racing so fast that these creeps might hear it. We silently listened to the noises outside from the garage, communicating in gestures. The attempts to gain entry to the house were sporadic, and occurred over a time frame of about 15 to 20 minutes. Eventually, everything ceased. I held my breath, and my heart stopped beating. And after about 20 seconds of staring at the garage handle, we hear a single word. Shit. It was the voice of a man. After standing there in shock and fear, afraid to move, we gathered the courage to make our way back upstairs. A few minutes later, there was a ring at the door. My heart dropped, and I'm certain my nuts did too. We proceeded cautiously with knives in hand when we peered through the peephole. We saw a Rogers worker, which is a telephone company here in Canada, with a clipboard. We opened the door and bombarded this guy with questions, eventually amounting to asking if he was the one trying to enter the house. He wasn't. From behind him we saw the van start up and then drive away. Number 2. This house I live in is only a couple of 100 meters away from a small church in a suburb. Although I was brought up a Christian, I was never truly religious, and I only went to said church whenever my parents took me as a kid. My father died when I was a teenager, and we stopped going as a family altogether. After that, I only went whenever my friends asked me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and I only pass by the church whenever I had to go into the city, because there's a dirt road beside it that leads to the parking lot behind, adjacent to a major road where it was easy to get a bus to work. It was closer than the village gate in the opposite direction, and I had to only ride one bus from there. I am not an easily scared man, nor have I previously experienced long-lasting trauma after being spooked, and I'm here to tell you that what I saw besides that church 3 months ago still haunts me to my core. A storm was announced to hit earlier that week, but leaving for work that early Thursday morning, the skies were clear, and not a single cloud to cover the starry sky. So I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind because they knew my family well. I work at a hotel as a line cook, and it's a very demanding job. I have to leave home before the sun rises most days, and I work until long after it's set. The only time I get to see the sun is if I'm assigned to the station at a buffet, where I have a view of the poolside. It was an average overworked and underpaid kind of day for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet. I stayed in the kitchen, where there weren't any windows, so I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently it had been raining heavily all afternoon, and although it had subsided around sunset, there was still a mild drizzle out. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel, and in my country, flooded streets meant standstill traffic for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't that uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before, and it also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't too upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight and it's pouring again. I'm not too far off from the church parking lot, so I decide to get off the bus and start walking, because it hadn't budged for the last 10 minutes. I put my phone and wallet in my waterproof backpack, which also contained a spare shirt, my house keys, and my knife set. I don't mind getting wet, and around this time the parking lot gate was already chained shut, but I climb over it like I usually do. It was flooded knee deep in the parking lot, and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured he retreated into the church. It's dark, but I focus on the small lights from the house in the distance. They only look like dots from that far. I trudge my way through the open parking lot that could have passed as a kiddie-friendly pool, when I heard this strange sloshing at the far corner of my left. Due to the heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out what was there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. All the lights to the lot were shut, and the only thing to guide me were a few lights of the houses far ahead and my memory of the area's landscape. It's a straight shot from the dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sound of all the falling raindrops accumulated into dull static noise, so it was easy for me to hear that there was something going on in the corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down, so I could only see them from the waist up. As I got closer, and my eyes better adjusted into the dark, I could tell that it was a woman, because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms and splashing the water around, grunting as she pounded her fists into the water. She was about 2 cars' length away, and I wasn't too concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her, and then got to the dirt road. Quite unnerving. She was out my line of sight, and at this point the mud made it quite hard to walk. Water was only ankle deep, but I kept having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes would sink into the mud. A small splash made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of that road, the woman was splayed out, face first in shallow water. I froze, thinking whether or not I should help her. I hate the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in 6 inches of water, and she was about 10 steps away from me, and before I could decide what to do, she started to move. It was too dark to see any details, but her outline was distinguishable enough for me to see that she was looking up at me. She slowly got on her hands and feet, like she was about to stand, but her hand lingered on the ground with her rump in the air. I was already scared pale at this point. My legs didn't work, and I thought of reaching for my knives, but I was honestly too afraid to move. And then she starts crawling towards me on her hands and feet. This sent a jolt through me, and all of a sudden I'm sprinting towards my house. I could hear the splashes behind me along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing, and my eyes started to fill with tears, and the rage against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry. But I knew at that point that I was running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was catching up, but I didn't have to look back. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig squeal. Short, sharp and loud. A wordless shout of anger. I believe that it was the fastest I've ever ran in my life, and at this point I couldn't hear anything but the rain. Deafening, unrelenting, and violent. My house was close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights, and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoes back at the dirt road. One last bend, and I was at my doorstep. I forcefully tore open my backpack zipper and fumbled around inside for a key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got in the house, slammed the door shut, and collapsed. I don't recall what happened for the rest of the night, but I woke up next morning in my bed. My older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night, and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door and quietly sobbing to myself. He awoke my mum, and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't speak. They tried to ask me questions, but I would just shake my head. They got me some dry clothes and led me to bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened, and my mum said she would notify the village guards. I could tell that they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear that I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work that day. In fact, I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guard did a minor investigation and even increased patrol for a while, but they didn't find anything but my shoes in the parking lot. When I did get better, I started taking the long walk to the main village gate to work. Going home, I now carpool with a buddy who can get me close enough home that I don't have to use the dirt road route. The days that he can't drive me, I take a taxi, even if it hurts my pocket a bit. I can't walk alone without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Suddenly loud noises make my heart jump, and I can't stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better though, and I can sleep with the lights off now. I just wish I could stop seeing the crawling woman's shape when I start drifting off to sleep. I wish I could tell you more about her. I honestly do. Because it's one thing to be afraid of things, but when you lack the understanding of what you fear, your mind fills in the blanks with terrifying detail. Number 3. This happened just last night, and honestly I'm still a little shaken up over it. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized city in the Midwest. I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of any other customers. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was not usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night, and it had just started raining. The woman was not wearing any weather-appropriate clothing, and she looked drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see if I could sort out some help. "Hi, beautiful. I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me," she said. "The place I want to go costs $60 in a cab, and I only have 40. Would you mind helping me out?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible, and my job centers around helping people. So I agreed. I told her that I couldn't give her any cash, but if she would come inside, I'd take out some money from the ATM and give her a few dollars. But the ATM wasn't working, so I apologized and told her there was nothing else I could do for her. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver door to get in. And then she got in my car. I was too shocked to really say anything. I sat staring at her as she buckled herself into the passenger seat. As soon as I got into my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed forlorn, as much as she did extremely excited and restless. "Just take me to my aunt's," she said. "She can give you money." Of course, alarm bells were going off in my head. Although my first instinct was to tell her to get out of my car, my gut tells me that it would be dangerous. She's already proven to be unpredictable. She seemed to be high, and I didn't know if she had any concealed weapons. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought had the potential to elicit a violent action. "Where are you asking me to take you?" I finally said. "Just start driving and I'll tell you where to turn." "No. If you want me to consider driving you anywhere, I will need you to tell me where we're going," I say, with no real intention of driving her anywhere. "Don't worry, honey, I'm not going to rob you. Just drive." "No," I repeat. I was asking her questions and she got really agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot, and I considered getting out of the car and going into the gas station for help. But she seemed to know and be friendly with one attendant that was inside when I tried to get the money, and I really wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. Don't you trust me?" "I work at a police department," I say. "It's my job to ask these sort of questions." And she flipped out, started yelling at me about being a snitch and trying to get her in trouble, and just generally losing her damn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just want her gone, but my instinct still told me that asking her to get out of my car wouldn't work, so I decided to take a risk. I'm not a police officer, I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have any ATMs that work? My idea was to get her out of my car peacefully as possible, and then lose her in the store. She liked my idea, and immediately calmed down. I knew that driving off with this woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like my best option at the time. As we were driving, she keeps talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seemed difficult to follow through one thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. "I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so that we can arrest them together." "Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow. Tonight, you said we're trying to get you home." "Yes, honey, I'm trying to get to Rochester." "Rochester? I thought you needed to go to Medway." Yeah, Medway, that's what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40. It's far away." "The cab ride is $40? "Yeah, baby." "You said you have $40. "I do, baby. I have $40, but the cab ride is $60. And then there was silence. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close to Baker Street." "I thought you said she lived close to Shirley Street." "No, baby, I meant Baker Street, but it doesn't matter because she won't give me money anyways. You sure you can't take me to Medway?" It was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was utterly full of shit, because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, but only after I got out first, and then she followed me into the store. I told her before we went in that I needed to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside the store, but she followed me into the bathroom, and that's when things got really weird. She grabbed the crook of my arm and whispered in my ear, "If you don't have any money, that's okay. But we can get a bit freaky in here if you like." I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, bolted into a stool and locked the door as fast as I possibly could. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends in the police department that could probably help you better than I can. I'm just going to call them and maybe we can figure this out together." Again, at the mention of the cops, she started screaming at me. I just kept reiterating that the police could help her, and she snapped at me that she was just going to leave and stormed out the bathroom. But it wasn't over. I waited to make sure she was really gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came back in the bathroom and started banging on the stall door and said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back with me to your car. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly tell her no. I saw her get into my car and she had absolutely nothing on her other than the clothes on her back. And after that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom and I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction than the one I worked in, because I was mortified at how entirely stupid I had been the entire night, and would have died of embarrassment if any of my co-workers had responded. The officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a report of a woman who matched my description assaulting a good Samaritan that stopped to try to help her. I definitely learnt my lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad that my stupidity didn't kill me. So next time you try and help a stranger late at night, don't. Number 4. I attend an extremely old college in Ireland. It was built in the 1700s as a seminary for Catholic priests during the collapse of the penal laws. It's now a generally secular institution, although it still has strong Catholic ties. I am a believer in God from a Catholic family, but I wouldn't call myself Catholic. The college accepts all denominations, nationalities and sexual orientations, so it's generally a great community-driven place. I am a history student, and during a recent class, we were told that our college was the site of a massacre of Irish rebels during the 1798 rebellion at the hands of the British. Some died on the front steps and others inside. I need to explain that I am an idiot, and I wanted to see if I could communicate with the spirits, which is both insensitive and plain dumb. But anyway, I did it and experienced the worst fright of my life. The way the college is laid out, when you enter, the dining rooms, library and majority of lecture halls, student union buildings and mediation areas are all located either straight ahead or to the right. The place is very Hogwartsian, and there are numerous stone steps leading everywhere. There's many stories to this building. It's very large, but the college population inclusive of staff and students, as well as daily visitors, is quite small. This means that after 5 o'clock, it's often deserted save a few people in the library. The main entrance to the corridor leading to the old entrance hall is where the current chaplain and college president lives. In this hall is a gigantic old portrait that spans nearly the entire wall, and a set of stone steps leading up several floors. I am currently minoring in history and majoring in English, and I've always been attracted to the ghostly. And after hearing about the rebellion in 1798, I decided to contact a few ghosts myself with this shitty app called Ghostbox E1 Spirit EVP. Only a few lecture halls located at the stone steps are generally not in use, but they are available for booking and are often left open. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. I sat at one of the lecture desks overlooking the front lawn of the college, in a lecture hall which I gauged to be roughly around the steps of the old entrance of where the people were killed. I tried for 4 or 5 minutes just asking the app different questions, and nothing was coming through. It was raining, and the room was kind of dark, and I was creeped out a bit. But I wanted to have something to tell people. I was asking the usual, "Is anyone here?" etc. And eventually I got a very faint voice saying something. I listened again, and it said something along the lines of "Imithe dia" 3 or 4 times. And for anyone who doesn't speak Irish, "Imithe dia" means God is gone. I was creeped out. You have to remember that the priest would have been speaking Irish a lot at the time, but I hardly imagined them saying God is gone. I was packing up my bag out of fear when the door I had just come through opened by itself and slammed shut. I froze. I couldn't move, and my blood honestly felt like ice. All I could hear was the pitter-patter of rain in the distance. I stood beside the desk for a minute before I started leaving again. I made it through the door and out onto the landing and started walking down the stone steps. I was shaking with fear, mind and my vision all gone weirdly black with fright. When I was on the next landing down, ready to go onto the next stone steps, the door I had come through started violently banging over and over. There was a man screaming very, very loudly. The words were incoherent, but let me tell you, the scream was blood-curdling. My blood subsequently went cold, and I don't know exactly how to describe it, but the door, a massively heavy door, continued to slam until I reached the main entrance. I could hear it through the halls, and I was bawling crying at this point, and shaking so bad I could hardly walk. I ran out the doors and onto the street, and I went and bought a Pepsi and sat down until my bus arrived. I haven't been able to sleep ever since, not properly anyway. This was a week or 2 ago, towards the end of the college year, and the exams were over, so at least I didn't have those to worry about. I'm not really sure what I experienced. In truth, it has left me utterly terrified. I'm rueful that I ever tried getting involved with spirits in the first place. I hope I didn't disturb anything, and hope that we can both mutually be left in peace. Number 5. A few years ago, my brother-in-law bought another apartment complex in Florida. He owns a few apartment complexes in West Palm Beach and Miami. So when he told me he bought another one and wanted me to manage it, I figured, why the hell not? I had just graduated college with my degree and planned to go out and get a master's, so I figured I could manage his place and do graduate school. When he booked my flight to Orlando, I was stoked. Hell yes. I love Disney and I dreamed about buying a year pass and checking out all the neat parks. Then when I got there, we drove out to Orlando and I had a bad feeling. He bought the apartment in a town called Leesburg. It's only about an hour from Orlando. It's if a biker town and a retirement community had a baby. I was a little disappointed that I was an hour from Orlando, with its nightlife and clubs and whatnot. I made it work though and soon started to settle into life managing the small apartment complex. I had my own 1-bedroom apartment in the corner, and then there were 10 other tenants. Most were older folks, snowbirds and retirees that spent their days golfing and swimming in the pool we had. There were 2 military families, one with small kids, and then there was Andy. Andy was an enormous man. I'm a pretty big guy, 6 foot and around 250 pounds, and he was at least 6'6" and 400 plus pounds. He walked with a cane and had long black hair which he put into a ponytail. He worked from home, or so he said, but rumour was that he was on disability after a horrific work accident. I didn't really care though. He paid his rent on time and he was quiet and kept to himself. I was only in this place once when his AC cut out, and to my surprise, found out that he was pretty neat. No food containers or pizza boxes or beer cans, etc. I expected a big guy like him to have things laid out. Things in our complex were pretty good for the next year, until one night in November. It was raining like it always does in Florida, and it was about midnight when someone rang my doorbell. I looked out and saw one of my tenants, Joseph. Joe was one of my retirees who retired to Florida to, in his words, play golf and drink beer. Normally he was all smiles and jokes, but that night his face was pale and he looked frightened. "I hate to bother you, Sam, but something isn't right with Andy," he said. I put my jacket on and followed him to his apartment, since Andy was his neighbor. He put his finger to his lip and motioned for me to listen. I put my ear up to the door and heard Andy fighting with someone. It sounded like whoever he was fighting with was also throwing things. I was taken aback, as he never had a guest over since the year I'd known him and that he'd lived there. So I knocked, and I heard him stomp over to the door and open it. Normally, he was very well dressed, put together, and like I said, he wasn't a messy guy. But he answered it in a t-shirt that had grease stains. His hair was limp and greasy, and he reeked of BO. I peered behind him and saw that his place was a disaster. I asked him if everything was okay. He was irritated and told me that it was, and pretty much shut the door in my face. I sent Joe back to his place and told him to let me know if he heard anything else, and went to bed. The next morning, I decided to pay Andy a visit to see if he was okay. And I went to his place and knocked. No answer. So I decided I would try again later. But I got busy doing other things and then forgot all about it. So December rolls around, and I am in starting to get the monthly rent checks. But there's none from Andy. That got me a bit worried, as he was always on time with his checks. So I knocked on his door. Nothing. I knocked again and I heard the guy grunting and moaning. Now, I should have called the police first, but I didn't. I opened the door with my keyring and was hit with the foulest smell ever. It smelled like shit, piss, vomit and BO rolled into one nasty smell. The walls were streaked with what I could assume was shit, and the place was trashed. I started to call Andy whilst dialing 911, and I heard the moaning from the back room. What I saw that day, I can never unsee. I sometimes still get flashbacks. Andy was naked and laying on the floor of his room on some dirty clothes. He was covered in his own shit and piss, and there was piles of vomit on the carpet. But what was worse is that he was covered in bites. Human bites all over his arms and legs, and they were starting to smell with infection. He was also bleeding from his rectum, and I wondered who attacked him. Was it the woman we heard him fighting with? I didn't get my answer until a few days later. He had to be rushed to the hospital and was fighting for his life in the ICU. The doctors spoke to his sister, who turned out to be his medical guardian. And things slowly came into place. Turns out Andy did that to himself. He suffered from multiple mental disorders. He stopped taking his meds the month before November. There was no other person that night. He was arguing with himself. Those bites, he infected himself. The bleeding from his rectum was from inserting a foreign object in there and doing so much damage it ruptured his internal organs. He ended up pulling through and went back home to live with his sister. I had the task of cleaning the apartment, and what I found whilst cleaning pretty much freaks me out, the same as finding him. He had a shoebox full of cutouts from magazines, old family photos, and even photos he obviously took of the residents of the apartments, including myself. All of the eyes were burnt out with cigarettes, and on some of them, X's were put over the mouths. I'm not sure if that was part of his mental decline, or if he was always that creepy and I just never noticed it. All I can hope for you, Andy, is that you got the help you needed, and are feeling better. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I love listening to the sound of rain, even though it doesn't really help much when recording. I find it so relaxing. Oh, I saw a video lately, which I thought was absolutely amazing, by my friend Killer Orange Cat about teenage runaways. Honestly, it's fantastic, and I really recommend you check it out as it's so good. The stories really get to you. I'll drop a link in the description and link it at the end of the video so you can check it out. It really is worth your time. Just a reminder that I have launched my merch store, so if you'd like a unique and limited edition piece of official Mortis Media merchandise, get your hands on a t-shirt quickly, as stocks will not last forever. And also, what are your thoughts on Mortis Media top hats? And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you'd like your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.